Doctor Who, but you've done an awful lot of acting. I've seen you in many parts. I thought that your performance in Educating Rita was quite wonderful, quite marvellous, so much better than Michael Caine, and I enjoyed that. And I also saw your Wild, and of course there's the film with the Rasputin and all this. Do you feel a little bit that because you've been on the telly and done Doctor Who that nobody remembers any of those other parts that you played and don't characterise you as an actor but think of you more as a performer on the television?
Well, no, I don't think that at all. I think that I was grateful to become Doctor Who and realise, you know, that in fact it wasn't an acting part, the way those heroes are not acting parts because they're predictable. That's the wonderful and difficult thing about playing a hero. Within predictability, how can you be surprising and amusing, you know? And when I got to Doctor Who, and then no one was telling me what to do anymore, you know, because the audience figures spoke for themselves. And so then people were consulting me about things, you know, and I went on Woman's Hour, and people were asking my opinion, as if I had any opinions worth listening to, you know, and I found that quite funny and enjoyed that, really. No, I was very happy to have become Doctor Who, and I finished 30-odd years ago, and yet yesterday I was blessing the fans who've grown old and bald and stooped with me, and who go on loving me, you know. That's quite something, really.
But don't you ever want to say, didn't you ever see me in Educating Rita? I mean, when people, you know, when your obituary is produced, wouldn't you like to be credited as a good actor elsewhere rather than simply in Doctor Who?
No, I don't think so, because I don't really rate my acting, but my Doctor Who was entirely Tom. It was just Tom. I wasn't acting, and it just fell into my lap, you know, and they said, how are you going to do it? And I said, I don't know. And I started saying the lines. And the children loved it, you know. And I thought, hey, so who wants to act? I can be Tom. They're loving Tom, you know. And I liked that. Because
we should remember the moment when you got the job, because just go back to the actual. What were you doing immediately before you went for an audition? How on earth did you get an audition for such a big?
I wrote to someone who I'd once worked for, and he had been at a casting session for Doctor Who because the other man had resigned. And they said, Bill, have you got any views? He was becoming the head of the department. He didn't have any views. And that night, he got a letter. The last letter he picked up was from me. And there was a little film called The Golden Voyage of Sinbad on, right next door to the BBC in Shepherd's Bush Green. When he went to the next one, the next day, he said, what about Tom Baker? And they said, we've never heard of him. He said, well, he's on in a movie next door. And they all piled off to the movie, right next door, 50 yards away. And they said, yeah, that's the man. It was amazing, eh? Absolutely amazing. And suddenly, I was struggling and short of money and living on somebody's floor who was very kind to me. And then suddenly, in a split second, I was a sex symbol. You know, people to be found desirable, to be desired, Laurie. Well, you know, we know, we've had our moments. But to be desired is a fantastic sensation, I think.
But when did the idea that you would end up at drama college was a bit strange? In the first place, it was almost, what was it that made you decide that you wanted to be an actor? Because looking at your background, what you were doing in Liverpool, that time in the Merchant Navy, the time in the monastery, there was nothing there which suggested that you might want to become an actor.
No, but when I was in the army, there wasn't all that much action. I was in the medical corps, so my superior officers were all quite young doctors, and we did a lot to entertain each other, you know. And so I got drawn into these entertainments, and especially wearing women's clothes, which I quite liked, which is probably what I liked about being a Roman Catholic. I just wanted to get dressed up in women's clothes that rustled, you know. Anyway, I did a very good impersonation of the matron. In fact, it was so, people were terrified it was so exact. And somebody said to me, the way people do, you know, hey, Tom, said this kind doctor, you know, you should go to the RADA and become an actor. Because they were all laughing at my performance, you know, and that's how it started, really. I mean, I can't say I was playing with little Pollock model theatres, you know, putting on plays with the children in the alleyway. wasn't like that at all.
But it was quite a class translation as well, wasn't it? Because you, coming from working class Liverpool, I mean, did somebody say this is how you do an audition, or I mean, how did you got into the Rose Bruford? You must have done an audition.
Yeah, I did an audition, and but I mean, people like us who'd been in the army and I'd been in the navy, and I told them I think that I'd been in the Foreign Legion. That was a lie, but they swallowed it. What did they know? And I told them I'd been on suicide missions and things like that, and they said, really? And their dentures clicked, and I thought, I can manipulate this lot. And it was quite nice. We've spent our lives manipulating people, but it was quite nice manipulating people who are quite powerful, I mean, actually, I suppose, really, the joy of seduction is the manipulation, isn't it, really? And they didn't know what we were talking about, did they? They hadn't read any plays. You'd been in plays by Max Frisch's on Amateur, while Rose Bruford, they were doing I Killed the Count, or Black Coffee. They were hopeless.
Did you learn anything at that college?
No, I picked up, I learned that if I was nice to girls and did my best at the ballet dancing, that they liked me a lot, and of course, naturally, one takes advantage of people who like one, I think.
You do say in your very, very funny autobiography, you talk about, I think, something about the time in the monastery, in a way, inclining you towards acting as well. Was there something about you that you went there? But you went there, I think you say in your book, to lose your sense of self, really, yeah. to prostrate yourself yeah. before God, in a way. Although I've read about your time there, I'm still never quite certain why you went there and how long you were there and what a strange life it was for you to live there.
Well, you see, at the Liverpool of that time, the only way out for an ordinary working class boy was through school, with a grammar school and then perhaps university or something like that. I was very impressionable and not very good. There was a lot of missing of school, so I didn't get into the grammar school or anything like that because of the war. And the other thing is, I was very vulnerable. When people were always telling me, I was brought up in a crisis time of deep faith, and deep faith makes people very, very strange. I think it makes them passionate about very ordinary things. So I remember, for example, a verbal felicity thereon, say, of my mother, who would say things like, put the kettle on, Louis, and in 5 minutes, if God spares us, I'll make the tea. As if somehow death was imminent, between actually putting the kettle on and making the tea. And so when Mr. Hart, the headmaster, was telling us, remember, Baker, you are nothing. You are nothing. I didn't have all that much confidence. I thought, I'm nothing, and then it was going to the idea of abasement, the idea of being nothing, the idea of confessing intimate things, And then, of course, at the age of, 10 or 11 or something, when I discovered what it was to have a throbber on. So when you went to confess it, and the priest, I've done an impure act, and the priest, who would be smoking 2 caps in full strength at the same time, would get closer when he'd heard that, and his beads would rattle, and his voice would become hoarse, and he'd always say, did pollution take place? And I thought, I was a bit baffled by that. Did pollution take, marvelous word. He said, did you take pleasure? I said, yes, I did. And then I couldn't stop, It's caused a terrible crisis. Because, we were frightened of being run over, mortal sin. And the idea of these ejaculations, which used to be, a prayer, an ejaculation to God, as opposed to an ejaculation of one's seed. The thing is, that there are millions and millions. You should have asked Richard Dawkins about this, about how many spermatozoa there are. But it wasn't just a mortal sin. When you spilled your seed, it was genocide. So
you were killing babies.
We were killing babies, and they're millions. And so the thing is that, when you're absolutely packed with seed, and I was doing genocide sometimes 3 times a day, which was a very hard burden on an 11-year-old boy.
You see, people forget today, don't they, how all-encompassing